Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly, kicking off this week's editions of the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here, for this show every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and an hour in from each of those zones for Central and Mountain. Our purpose is to talk about all things related to trusts and estates, probate, estate planning, both from the perspective of an individual or maybe it's a married couple who need to do their own estate planning, or from the perspective of professionals who are involved in estate planning, helping other people handle these very important matters, or are interested in learning how to do so in order to augment their businesses. So today, we're going to talk about something called special needs, plural, trusts. So for people who have a loved one who has special needs says it all. Typically, we say they have some kind of disability, although it doesn't have to be a physical disability. It could be an emotional issue. They could be neurodiverse or something like that. So creating a special needs trust will help ensure that they have the funds available for whatever additional services they may need, or just for whatever services they may need if they're not able to work, or if they're not able to earn enough money to support themselves. Okay, so this is an interesting and somewhat complex area of estate planning or of trusts. I'm going to talk about some basic issues. Now, none of this is legal advice, okay? For those of you who've watched the show before, you know I'm not a lawyer, although I may sound like one. That comes from having been a law clerk in another life. Okay, so this is some general information for you to have and to see if this might be something that you want to explore with your own advisors, your lawyer, your accountant, both perhaps. Okay, and so let's as I oftentimes do, I've put together a little PowerPoint. Oops, one second here. I just realized I made a mistake on something. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to try again. There we are. Okay. And let's see, here we go, slideshow. Okay. There we are. All right. So this is the show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. And again, for those of you who are regular watchers of the show, you know this graphic, the 3 pillars of attainment. As we often do on Trusts and Estates Weekly, while we're dealing primarily in the pursuits pillar and the finances realm, we are also dealing with relationships, primarily family, although they could be friends and colleagues. And we may be dealing with our own identity as, someone who's taking care of a person. Oh, wow, that was weird. It did advance itself. All right. So special needs trusts, ensuring care for loved ones with disabilities. So why would you do this? Well, I mentioned one of the most important reasons a few minutes ago, and that is that your loved one may not be able to support himself. Now, he may be working, but that job may not pay enough for him or her to be able to support himself, and or the person really may not be able to work, and in fact they may be receiving, I should say, government benefits. So most of you are familiar with Social Security. So a large part of the Social Security program is actually called Supplemental Security Income, SSI. And SSI is paid to those people who are eligible for benefits Oftentimes they are not at retirement age. Okay, so these are people with disabilities of one sort or another. Okay, and they qualify for a monthly payment in the same way that a Social Security recipient gets a monthly payment. Okay, and by the way, these loved ones may also be receiving Medicaid. Okay, Medicaid is a state administered federal government supplemented payment for medical insurance. Okay. And since both of these programs are government benefit programs, they are means tested, which means that the benefits can vary and can be reduced if a person has means over certain limits. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole subject on its own. But suffice it to say that if a loved one has a lot of assets, that may either result in them being denied government benefits or having those benefits reduced. And so by creating a special needs trust, their eligibility is protected. Okay, so that's a very strong second reason for setting up a special needs trust if it is the case with your loved one that they're getting or maybe that they're eligible, even if they're not at the moment getting, but they may be eligible for government benefits. So this is a way to in essence protect their assets while also, or I shouldn't say protect their assets, maintain their assets, or give them assets in a way that doesn't impair their eligibility for government benefits. Now, I want to mention as a little bit of a side note. So while a special needs trust will protect or may protect eligibility for benefits, okay, it does not protect from Medicaid estate recovery. Okay, so this is a situation where a Medicaid beneficiary has been overpaid benefits, and then when they die, Medicaid will seek to recover that overpayment. Okay, so if there are assets left in the trust when your loved one dies, those are subject to Medicaid estate recovery. Okay, but that's different than the person not being eligible for Medicaid at all. Okay, so a special needs trust can still be a wonderful vehicle for helping out your loved ones, even though like I said, in the end, if there are assets left in the trust after your loved one passes away, so Medicaid may be able to obtain some or all of those assets in order to get reimbursed for an overpayment. Okay, so now a special needs trust can be created to pay for a variety of expenses. They could be educational expenses. They could be healthcare expenses. They could be living expenses. Now, and the thing is, the trust can be set up so it can pay for any type of expense, or it can be set up whereby it may only cover certain expenses, or it may cover all expenses except these other expenses. Okay, so how the grantor or the trustor, which is the person who sets up the trust, sets it up will determine which expenses the trustee can use the funds for. Now, it is important to note, and I'm going to get into this more when I talk about trustees, that a special needs trust is for the benefit of the beneficiary, the loved one whose care is being insured. Okay? And like all trusts, the trustee is not supposed to use those funds for the trustee's benefit. Okay, so whatever expenses are being paid for, okay, those expenses are for the benefit of the beneficiary. Now, The trust could provide for some kind of payment to the trustee, okay, and that will need to be specified in the trust documents when it's set up, okay? If there is no payment mechanism for the trustee in the trust, okay, generally speaking, the trustee is going to be acting in an unpaid capacity. Now, it is possible for the trustee to go to court and petition the court for payment, okay, and then it'll be up to the discretion of the court, okay? But this is really something that should be dealt with at the time the trust is created, whether or not the trustee is going to get paid. Okay, let's move on to the next one now. Okay, so let's talk about some of the aspects of creating a special needs trust. Okay, unlike other types of trusts, a special needs trust must be irrevocable, meaning once it's created, it cannot be changed. So, for example, let's use a case where the grantor is not the beneficiary, okay? So let's say the grantor's grandparents set up this special, the beneficiary's grandparents are the grantors and they set up the special needs trust. Once whatever assets they put in the trust are in the trust, they're not able to get them back. Okay, that's the nature of an irrevocable trust. In essence, it becomes a separate entity from the grantors. Okay, it's, by the way, a separate entity from the beneficiary as well. All right. Now, the reason this is important is because the irrevocability of the special needs trust is what will give protection for eligibility for government benefits. Okay, so if the trust were revocable, it would not protect government benefits eligibility. Okay, so again, a special needs trust is a type of irrevocable trust. Now, you can see already it can be pretty complex, and the details are important in order that the trust will accomplish what it's out to do. And as a result, then, it needs to be drafted by an expert. Okay, this is not something for an attorney who is unfamiliar with special needs trusts to do. You want to work with an attorney who specializes not only in estate matters, but has done special needs trusts before, and they're familiar with all the laws related to them in the state in which you're dealing. Okay, so this is not something to set up on your own. This is not something I would say to go to a paralegal with. This is something to make sure you're working with someone who knows the details. Okay, in a special needs trust, and then this is generally the case in trusts anyway. The devil really is in the details. Okay, once the trust has been created, and the way it's created is a trust agreement is written and it's signed, and now the trust exists. However, assets are not automatically transferred to the trust. The trust has to be funded. Okay, now there's basically two ways that a trust can be funded. One is it can be funded during the lifetime of the grantor or grantors. So I'm just going to use the singular going forward. Okay, so the grantor may have, let's say, $100,000. Okay, and they transfer that money into the trust. Okay, during their lifetime. Now, another way to fund the trust is as part of their estate plan, they can fund the special needs trust when they die. Okay, so in that case, the funding would come via their estate. Okay, now in the interim, since the trust has no funds, There's nothing in it to benefit the beneficiary, okay? But that may be fine. The person, the grantor during his lifetime may be taking care of the beneficiary, and so there's no need for the special needs trust to take care of that person. The concern is what's going to happen to my loved one after I die, okay? So then after I die, I'm going to have a provision in my estate plan whereby a certain amount of money goes to funding the special needs trust. And at that point, then, the trustee of the trust will take on the responsibility of handling that money. Okay, so those are two different ways that a special needs trust can be funded. All right, and by the way, it could be partially funded during the grantor's lifetime, with additional funding coming via the grantor's estate when the grantor passes away. All right, next, you must choose the trustee carefully. This is one of the most, if not the most crucial choice you're going to make in creating a special needs trust. Okay, first of all, the person needs to be trustworthy, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Secondly, the person needs to be able to understand how to administrate a trust. Okay, so they need to know what they're doing. They need to have some administrative and financial knowledge. They need to have some understanding of dealing with a person who has special needs, a person who has disabilities, okay? And they need to understand the obligation that they have taken on. This is, being a trustee is not to be taken lightly, okay? So oftentimes, the grantor of a special needs trust will appoint a relative. Now, that may be fine if the relative is honest, knowledgeable, and has, the understanding and the ability to deal with a person who has disabilities. Okay, but if the relative is a spendthrift, now there's a danger, because as I mentioned earlier, that trustee may be tempted to use the funds for his own benefit at times, and not purely for the benefit of the beneficiary. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I'm what's known as an alternate trustee on a special needs trust. That means if for some reason the trustee is unable to fulfill the trustee's obligation, maybe that trustee dies, so then I step in and take over. Okay, but as the alternate trustee, I keep an eye on what's happening with this with the special needs trust. And what I've noticed in the last period of time is a tremendous amount of money. Over 50% of the assets of the trust have been used to little discernible benefit by the beneficiary. Okay, now that's problematic. Okay, especially because the funds that have been taken by the trustee have gone into the trustee's personal checking account. Now, the beneficiary is a minor, so there's nothing wrong per se with that. However, there is no way to track what the money has been spent on, and the trustee is not doing any kind of accounting. Okay, so quite a bit of money has been taken out of the trust, and there's no accountability on the part of that trustee. Okay, so this may be a matter, by the way, that'll have to be taken up with the courts. So that's to be determined down the line. But it would have been better if a trustee had been chosen who, in this case, wasn't known to be a spendthrift, frankly. Okay, it was a mistake on the part of the grantor. That happens. Okay. But, word to the wise, okay, be very, very careful who you choose as a trustee, because in the end, the success of the special needs trust as a vehicle for taking care of your loved one will largely rest on the shoulders of the trustee, especially if the beneficiary is not really able to look after himself. So there may be no one keeping an eye on what the trustee is doing. Okay. Now, in the example I gave you, since I'm an alternate trustee, I don't get paid for doing this. I've made it a point to keep an eye on what's happening with the trust, but there may not be an alternate trustee, or the alternate trustee may be, as is often the case, like a bank, for example. They're probably not going to exercise any oversight on the current trustee. They have no obligation to, and they may not even realize they've been appointed as the alternate trustee. Okay, so in that case, and this is one of the dangers of a special needs trust, if the trustee is not scrupulously honest, so then your loved one could end up, with little or any benefits from the special needs trust. Okay, so again, I've said this already, probably 3 or 4 times. Make sure you choose your trustee carefully. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. Yeah, we're doing all right. All right, next. There are basically 2 types of special needs trusts: a first-party trust and a third-party trust. Okay, now, a first-party trust is a situation where the beneficiary is also the grantor. In other words, the beneficiary is taking his own property and transferring it into this irrevocable special needs trust, I should say, singular. This is a way for a special needs beneficiary to protect his assets while still remaining eligible for government benefits. Okay, and the reason it's called a first-party trust is because there's one grantor and one beneficiary. So the first party is also the beneficiary. All right. The other type of special needs trust is a third-party trust. In a third-party trust, someone other than the beneficiary is the grantor or trustor. Those are the same party. Okay, it could be the beneficiary's parent or grandparent, or parents and grandparents. Okay, but in any event, they're third parties. They're other than the beneficiary. In this case, and let's just use a situation where it's the parent. So a parent creates the trust and funds the trust from the parent's assets. Okay, that's what makes it a third-party trust. Okay, and this, these 2 different types of special needs trusts don't operate any differently once they're set up. It's just that who creates them and funds them is really what distinguishes between the 2. Okay, so honestly, I don't know which is more common, although I suspect it's a third-party trust is more common. Okay, oftentimes if someone has special needs, they may not have assets on their own. Okay, but in any event, these are the 2 types. Okay, and by the way, on the special needs trust, it's not going to say this is a first-party special needs trust. It's just it's these 2 types describe really who set it up and where the money comes from. That's all. Once the trust is created, it's irrevocable. And so to a large extent, it doesn't matter where the funding came from, because now that it's in the trust, it can't be pulled back by whoever the funder was. The trust now stands on its own. Okay. All right. So those are the basics of a special needs trust. And here on the screen, just a few ways that you can get help, ask questions, make comments, positive or negative. If you have any thoughts, please do feel free to share them. All of these links and some others will be in the show notes after this episode posts. So if you do have any questions, or if you, for example, if you need a referral to an attorney who specializes in doing these, I'll be happy to make that referral for you. I do know quite a number of estate planning attorneys, as you might imagine, and so happy to do that to help you out. And I think we have just the legal stuff, so don't have to worry about that. Stop the share. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Special needs trusts are a great estate planning tool, I'll call it. Not really a vehicle, but a tool. They're a way to, again, take care of a loved one who is unable to take care of himself. Okay, and that way you can have peace of mind that when you're no longer able to directly take care of a loved one, or maybe you have more than one loved one who needs this type of support, your loved ones, they will continue to at least have some of their financial needs covered. Okay, and again, I want to go back and emphasize this issue because it is so important. Who you choose as the trustee in the end is going to make the difference between this, between the special needs trust actually helping your loved one or not. Okay, so really take time to think about it. Talk to the person you're thinking about having the trustee, get an understanding of whether this person really will dedicate the time and understanding and has the knowledge necessary to fulfill that position. Okay, so that's special needs trusts, and that's our show for today. Tomorrow is at 11 a.m. Pacific time is business lessons from the military. We're continuing, and in fact, I think we're going to wrap up our discussion on cultural literacy and cultural differences as an aspect of being in business or handling businesses. Okay, and then on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time is people making money. And we're going to talk about the issue of whether you should buy or rent your home. Now, your home may be an apartment or a condominium or a single family residence or duplex, whatever, right? In these days with higher interest rates, some of the highest interest rates we've seen in quite a long time, buying a home may be difficult. You may be priced out and you may be forced to rent. On the other hand, depending on how a particular deal is structured, maybe it still makes more sense for you to buy a home. So we're going to look at those issues and show how do we break these down? How do we figure these out? What are some of the issues involved? Okay, so that'll be on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. People making money. And then 7 days from today, next Monday, we will start over again with the next episode of Trusts and Estates Weekly. So I thank you very much for tuning in. Appreciate it. Before I let you go, just a quick reminder, if you're not a subscriber to the Way to Wow channel, the Way to Wow Show's channel on YouTube, please do consider becoming a subscriber. There'll be a link in the show notes, and that way you'll be notified of all anytime a show is going live, and you will never miss a single episode. So again, thank you very much for joining me today. I don't want to say this morning because it's afternoon in part of the country. Look forward to seeing you later this week, and signing off. Marie, darling, you are and ever will be my belle. All the best, folks.